Hello and welcome to the monthly PCP webinar. Just a reminder that attendees are muted and your video is shut off. Please use the question and answer function for any questions. Joe does have some time built in for questions as we go through the presentation, or you may receive a follow-up email if it's a longer question or a specific question to your situation. And added onto the screen today, there is a link for our new webpage and the help desk that are both up and running. And I will also put that link in the chat box for you to access as we go through the webinar today. So now I would like to welcome and introduce Joe Longcore.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Marie. Pull up my my slides here and we'll get started. A little bit about myself. I'll try to keep it brief. My name is Joe Longcore. I'm the Supported Employment Specialist, as you see on this slide, for the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services at Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities Administration. I formerly worked in Allegan County, had the pleasure of working there for 7 years and learned a tremendous amount, and then moved to the state, working at the state now since 2005. So much of this is learned experience over those years and in my work now again at Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities Administration. It seems like as I wondered about what to share today, backgrounds about employment and the focus on employment, and especially competitive integrated employment, and even more so individual competitive integrated employment. So what I've done is shared a bit about legislation, 3 different legislations, or 2 legislations in an executive order, evidence-based and promising employment practices out there, and a bit of data, hoping to, I don't know, spur some questions perhaps that Heather will catch in the questions area there, the chat. And as Heather said, I put a break in here for to respond to questions after certain sections. So if you let me go a few slides at a time, we'll take a minute break or 2 and see what happens and then move on along. So again, let's talk about changes. It seems to be the only thing we are guaranteed anymore is changes, right? So from a perspective, I thought maybe to put a foundation in here, we ought to talk about what happened back in 2014, 2015, and into 2016. Things that really affected and created a change to employment services. One was the Work Information and Opportunity Act. This is WIOA as it's known. I'm guessing some to many of you may know about this act. It's Rehabilitation Services Administration at the federal level. And that, excuse me, had to stop an alarm on my phone, excuse me. But anyhow, WIOA, this is the overarching legislations for Michigan Rehabilitation Services and the Bureau of Services for Blind Persons. Significant change in 2014 as that legislation was changed and became far more focused, more well-defined about competitive integrated employment. And I want to drill down on one specific area, as FAQs, frequently asked questions, occurred in 16, 17, and then repeated in 18 or 19, and again recently in 2022. So one area there. Hoping to tie a little bit into the self-determination focus of that as well. And then the Home and Community-Based Services Rule, the HCBS rule under Medicaid services from the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Talk just with a slide or so on that. And then also an action that President Obama did when he worked and he raises the minimum wage to be paid by federal contractors. I think a very important thing that happened in 2014 as well. So we'll move forward. And what you see on your screen is RSA is Rehabilitation Services Administration, the federal rehabilitation partners for those that, again, Michigan Rehab Services and Bureau of Services for Blind Persons, that's who they work with at the federal level. And these FAQs that you see there, the frequently asked questions came in after 2014 and were responded to, as I said a moment ago, in 2016 and 17, and repeated again. It was either in 18 or 19, I think. And then here again, when you see 22-2, that was recently here. So that's a live link. We send it out the field. You should be able to find it. If not, let me know, and I'll get a link to Marie and or Heather that they can send out to folks. This document is probably 25 or 30 questions long, but the one I was hoping to focus on, wanted to focus on here is question 19. Prior questions to this have real detail about what is competitive integrated employment, what's an integrated setting, wages paid, and that kind of stuff. But in question 19, when it asks, must an individual with a disability choose competitive integrated employment? What I'd like to do is read the first sentence or two of this and then catch up toward the bottom. And at the bottom of this, where you see it underlined, that's emphasis by me. It's not in the federal legislation that way, but it is a focus of what I was just trying to share. So when it says, must an individual with a disability choose competitive integrated employment? Remember, this is federal legislation. If the individual wants to receive services and supports from the VR program, bulk rehab, that being Michigan Rehabilitation Services and the Bureau of Services for Blind Persons, if they want to receive services and supports from that program, the individual must choose an employment outcome, which means the individual must intend to pursue competitive integrated employment or supported employment. And then they reference the Rehab Act and certain sections of it and such. I'm not going to take your time and read all of that to you. But if you press through this toward the bottom of it, where it begins with however, I hope you can see my cursor going around the word however. Given all these requirements, it says, however, these requirements must not be construed as limiting an individual with a disability's choice as to the type of employment the individual chooses to pursue. Instead, when explained, these requirements help to inform the individual of the purpose of the VR program and the types of employment outcomes available through the program that will maximize the individual's potential for competitive integrated employment. Again, I underscored what I'm going to read to you here. With this understanding and other information acquired through the informed choice process described in response to the questions that were prior to this, 17 and 18, the individual can choose to pursue competitive integrated employment with the assistance of the VR program. So that's what they want, competitive integrated employment. VR program finds them eligible. Well, that can happen with the assistance of the VR program. Or, this is a fairly large or, other forms of employment with the support of other federal, state, or local programs designed to meet those needs. So if a person chose not to pursue competitive integrated employment, well, that can happen, but the implication here is that the VR program wouldn't be supporting that, as they have in the past in some ways. It's much more focused on individual placement and follows the wording and expectations within WIOA. So there's a fundamental change in 2014, 16, 17 in the language, and then It's echoed and refreshed up through this FAQ of February of 22. So if I move on, the other big change that I trust most of you are certainly well aware of, I hope, is the home and community-based services rule through the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, the HCBS rule. So just a quote from there, and this is echoed a little bit below in our own state Medicaid provider manual, but I think it's important to focus in on that intent. The final rule addresses several sections of Medicaid law under which states may use federal Medicaid funds to pay for home and community-based services, HCBS. The rule supports enhanced quality in HCBS programs. It adds protections for individuals receiving services. In addition, this rule reflects CMS, that is Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, intent to ensure that individuals receiving services and supports through Medicaid's HCBS programs have full access to the benefits of community living and are able to receive services in the most integrated setting. So in the Medicaid provider manual here in Michigan, at the link that you see in, I guess it's a red or a rich brown, if you go to that website and you click on the icon in the upper left-hand corner, you'll see some dots and some lines. If you click on that, it'll open the table of contents. If you scroll down alphabetically, you'll come to home and community-based services. Then select section 3 for home and community-based settings. And the, it states that through the HCBS final rule, CMS, or Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, impose certain requirements for HCB settings, which consist of those settings where individuals live, those being residential settings, and those where individuals go to receive services, such as employment services in the community, where those services happen. So this encompasses employment. All HCB settings where people live or receive Medicaid HCBS must have the same characteristics to the same extent as those individuals not receiving Medicaid HCBS. That's a mouthful, but it really means for many of us in the workforce that are not receiving Medicaid services, the same is expected with our Medicaid funding to help those individuals that we support. That's the life, that's the experience, that's the pathway for them to experience, very similar to those either on this webinar right now or this conference, whatever we're doing right now, in my own life, right? Working with individuals, choosing that job in the work that I enjoy and like doing, going to those celebrations that my core team or my expanded team have. Not necessarily having only one choice of going to a particular location and doing work that may not be of interest to me. So very important to understand that the focus here is that our work becomes finding those opportunities and alternatives for individuals, just like all of us have. And the third one that I wanted to mention here from a legislative standpoint was in 2014, President Obama had an executive action. It was implemented in January of 2015. And I just put in here briefly, captured from the source that you see at the tail end of this writing here. President Barack Obama signs an executive order requiring that workers employed under federal contracts, including those with disabilities, be paid at least $10.10 per hour. That was significant, as folks at that time, many were being paid $8.25 or so, or even less if they were under a 14C certificate, a sub-minimum wage. And this was challenged by advocates nationally. And President Obama came back and said, no, this is for everyone, including those with disabilities. So that had an impact on our systems in itself, in my opinion, when federal contractors needed to raise what they were paying per hour to individuals. It changed the course and the pathway as to some individuals that were going to keep those jobs and have those jobs, but it also encouraged that equity needed for paying people a far more livable wage at that time. And so those are the three legislative pieces that I thought I would start out with. Got a couple of minutes if anyone has any questions, and if not, I'll just plod on. But do we have anything that I need to address, Heather?
So I don't see anything in the chat box right now. But just a reminder to everyone, please, put your questions in there and we will get them at the next question break.
Okay. We'll dive down into some more details in this next section, and I'm totally open to it becoming conversational, especially at the end, if I've planted the seed or about questions. So do let us know in the chat box. I thought maybe I'd give you a taste about just recently what's happened during the employment during the COVID pandemic. I trust many of you are just exhausted as I am and tired of all of this. Grateful to see it becoming, I don't know, I keep calling it the veil is being lifted a little bit, and I certainly hope it continues. But some things that we've learned through it, I'd like to echo here in a little bit in this slide and a couple of slides that you see me repeating or next here. This slide was prepared by the State Employment Leadership Network. You'll see that in the lower right-hand corner. They're a subset of the National Association of State of Directors of Developmental Disability Services. And this is focused primarily or solely on folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So they shot out a survey to the field that was collected in May, June of 2020. You'll see in the lower corner that they were able to reach out and collect information from individuals in competitive integrated employment of 8,919 individuals or respondents, and group supported employment of 1,922. And so that's what this reflects. The blue being those individuals in individual competitive integrated employment and how they fared, how it worked out for them compared to those that are in the green bars, which is group supported employment. So individuals that continued working after March 1st of 2020, 46% of those in competitive integrated employment, the blue bar, continued working, whereas only 25% of them in group supported employment continued working. So I don't know about the rest of you. If I start to piece that together in my mind and think back to home and community-based services rule and the work that any of us do, folks, I continued working. Things changed. I started working from home, but I continued working. I wasn't on a group. It wasn't subject to the other business. I kept working. And this kind of reflects that too. Individuals in competitive integrated employment, 46% of them continued working, outpacing those that were in groups. What about furloughed? Well, 31% of them were furloughed if they were in competitive integrated employment, but 56% were furloughed if they were in group supported employment. Pretty similar if they were laid off at 6 and 7%. And for those that chose voluntarily not to work, you'll see that 14% chose not to if they were in competitive integrated employment, but outpacing that was 20% in group supported employment. So some impacts, perhaps underscores, or it's being suggested that it underscores the advantage to being in individual competitive integrated employment. The more information during the pandemic, much of this is anecdotal. This is from a good number of meetings, either nationally or here with providers across the state, and local CMHs reporting about how the employment was going for folks. Many of the facility-based settings closed. They didn't have the ability to suddenly make a big change and shift to doing other things. So they closed during a period and individuals stayed at home. Kudos to the Michigan Developmental Disabilities Council. They continued their efforts to support rate restructuring across the state, about how and when you pay for employment services and how to be more effective at that. We found now, or through their work, that several facility-based settings have reshaped their work to solely community-based. So with planning, with strategies, with looking at the money that they were already being paid, how do you reshape that money and restructure it in such a way that you focus on community integrated employment, and specifically individual competitive integrated employment, okay? Through this time frame and to now, several facility-based settings did not or are not renewing their 14C, the sub-minimum wages, their certificates, the certificate a provider can get in order to pay those wages. Many have stopped using them or are discontinuing it. Recently, I have been told that the 14C use, there was better than 8,000 individuals in Michigan working under 14Cs, sub-minimum wage, back in 2014. It's approximately around 2,200 individuals now. And there are sites that are coming up for recertification in May or beyond. And I'm told, or my understanding is, that some to many of them aren't going to reissue or resubmit and do the paperwork. So we're moving away from sub-minimum wage and that kind of work in large group settings with a much higher focus on individual competitive integrated employment. Some of those facility-based settings remain closed, again, because they weren't able to transform and make changes. And the one that echoes here in a little bit in the one of the next slide or two is, I have heard from individuals and families, they're now seeking individual competitive integrated employment. They see it as more stable. That would be like in the graph I showed you, and also a safer place to be from illness, as opposed to large congregate settings. And that's kind of I don't know, one of those things that I guess we're a bit grateful coming out of COVID pandemic, that we're all pressed to think differently and try different ways, and families and individuals are going, that competitive integrated employment, I know somebody else that had that and they kept working, but I didn't. So that's what I want. I think about self-determination and personal choice, and I can believe that would be what I'd want to do, right? So I wanted to share that with you. Any questions about this stuff about related to folks with intellectual or developmental disabilities, and where we've come or where we're at following the pandemic? I see the chat lit up by one.
So the question is, so if I'm understanding this, a person with a disability can continue in supported employment indefinitely.
A person with a disability could continue in supported employment indefinitely under Medicaid services? Is that the question? I would think that may be the question. Under,
Yes.
yeah, thank you. Under the Medicaid services in Michigan, the goal certainly is for the individual to be as independent as possible or interdependent with their coworkers. That's the goal. And for it to be competitive integrated employment. But the services, yeah, the services are to be there and available to help a person when and as applicable and they're eligible for it, to seek out that job they want, to be knowledgeable about I don't know, benefit planning, which I'll mention a little bit later, what the opportunities are so that they're not fearful of that, or just be wiser in their choices. But also if they get the job, it's our system, the Medicaid system, our role to look for good connections, good placements, and to do more work in the beginning, in the forefront, helping that good placement happen so that it's the right opportunity for an individual, as opposed to just a place and go, and then maybe the person does need hands-on support indefinitely. Whereas with the right early placement, it can be much more personalized, and the person can be more successful with either the employer's help or their coworkers. And I've had a couple of stories shared recently about such things like that, where somebody's been placed, the staff has thought they were going to have to help, let's use my name, Joe, in a long time, and the employer's gone, I can do this, I'll check with you, or I'll ask Joe if he wants to talk about things, but the employer being more receptive. Was there another question? I see it went up to another number, Heather.
Sandra just added on there that they have been told that they must be able to fade out the supports.
Well, fading, in my opinion, and I'd be glad to follow up with somebody if they want to shoot me an email. There's an email address at the end of the PowerPoint. Fading to me could range over a lot of different percentages, right? But I have never encouraged going into a position where you think somebody's going to solely need supports, 100% for indefinitely, or there should be a step down plan to how you can allow the person to be as independent as they can, as I said earlier, and especially with efforts to have the employer do their job as an employer, or coworkers. I've seen and heard, stories of staff people that, are getting into cars, driving a distance to help somebody in job coaching or being there real often, and do some of the most rudimentary things, when the goal ought to be working with that employer and figuring out how another employee might put that box up on the high level if you're stacking on a skid or something, as an example. There's ways to solve for that, and when employers are struggling as much for staff as they are right now, it's real important that we take the opportunities and engage with the employer and coworkers to partner and help that person feel welcome and be an employee. Let me move on to the next section, and this will probably, it'll address some things, or it'll raise a few more questions, and we'll find some time at the end. As I say, we're about halfway through our hour. Let me do that, and then we'll catch these questions.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you. I wanted to present a few slides on individual placement and support. This is the IPS model for persons with serious mental illness. Individual placement and support, IPS, is a model of supported employment for people with serious mental illness, folks with schizophrenia, spectrum disorder, bipolar, depression. IPS supported employment helps people living with behavioral health conditions work at regular jobs of their choosing. Although variations of supported employment exist, and certainly there are, right? I mean, there's still group employment, there's customized employment, there's IRS recognized self-employment and like that. But IPS refers to the evidence-based practice of supported employment for persons with serious mental illness. It's based on 8 core principles. This will be posted, so I'm not going to go into great length on it, but those core principles are zero exclusion. If somebody wants employment, then it's you engage with them, you work with them, and it doesn't matter. For a long time there used to be a rule about being 90 days clean or something, and well, that's not the case. If somebody wants to work, then you start working with them for helping them find employment, and you work through the challenges that come with whatever the person brings to the table. Integrated employment and treatment. It's integrated in the mental health treatment system as services. You're working directly and closely with case managers and therapists and others that are in the person's life. These are competitive jobs. They are individual competitive employment. That's the goal. It's rapid job start. It's not necessarily the person's going to have a job in 30 days as it shows here, but there's going to be engagement and efforts on job search within that first 30 days. That could be by the employment specialist helping the individual after they've determined a target, maybe 2 or 3 specific areas they want to find work in, and you focus on it, and either the employment specialist or the individual themselves is out and working at that with help and support by that employment specialist. It's systematic job development. The employment specialists systematically, I mean, they very much are trying to develop relationships with employers that have the kind of work that the person is interested in, so that when I'm out trying to help Joe, I'm reaching into my employer bag and I'm pulling out and aware of employers that are doing that work and what they need. And I'm discovering what the employer needs. It's more an exchange of opportunity and help than just, do you have a job, and you place it because the local cheeseburger place has got a job, but Joe wants to do far different work than that, but that's where he gets placed. This is very much focused on the person's preferences. Time unlimited support, a little bit to that other person's question. I often find in this work with folks with serious mental illness, job coaching doesn't happen as much hands-on stuff, but calls or virtual technology now is being used quite a bit. A lot of folks in this program are finding that they're being successfully closed from employment services in as little as 90, 120 days, 180 days, half a year, some folks up to a year and a few beyond, but that would also be that reflection of fading the services in the work, still working with a case manager maybe or something like that, but it's time unlimited, that if the person needs it, the program is to avail themselves and maybe reopen that door to employment services when and as needed. Consumer preferences, I think I touched on that plenty, and benefits planning, the fact that pretty foundational to anybody making a decision with a disability, whether serious mental illness or intellectual developmental disability, is that benefit question. So going into it, how are folks going to know that they can work and feel positive about that? At the bottom, I just note that these above core principles certainly may be and are applicable to assist a person with any disability, but Michigan BHDDA is not recognizing it as IPS unless it supports a person with serious mental illness and the site remains current in its fidelity reviews. There's a very specific fidelity scale that is applied to these programs, and that's the expectation. Anecdotal comments here, a couple of them similar to what I shared before. Those first 3 months, there was an uncertainty across the field, and it challenged employment for sure. And then we started getting comments that many individuals with serious mental illness were more independent than before COVID. And a little bullet under that, I think what staff were saying is they determined that they found that they themselves had been overly supportive. They were going to pick up Joe instead of encouraging Joe, in some instances, to drive his own car, but in other instances to catch a ride with a family member or take transit if possible. Or maybe there's an employer they already knew that was even at the same place, to use those natural supports and not increase dependency, but build that interdependence with others. Virtual supports, they have been preferred by some individuals, and it remains that way for some. With these employer staffing needs, as they've arose, providing individuals now with this opportunity to prove their value. You know, we've seen that, and I hear stories about, wow, what an employee, what a catch I got by hiring this person. And I've heard that not only in the IPS model, but across the board for the dedication and work values of individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. It's just been great. The wages grew. It has for most of us, right? Because of what's going on, but wages have grown. And we found a lot of people working in the gig economy, in Uber and food delivery and more stuff like that. We did find and work to address the fact that some didn't realize in the gig economy that that's self-employed, and they didn't realize they weren't paying taxes, I guess. So we work to address that, and it's something to be aware of going forward. And the next slide will show you that some of the highest employment rate has been recognized now during last summer, in April through June. This is the Michigan IPS, the Individual Placement and Support Employment Rate for April through June. It was the highest since we started tracking this in this model over the last 5 years, at 44.9% of those in the on the caseloads. The gold or bronze color, that number is 1,582 people being helped during that quarter. And the burnt red, or the that color, there were 711 people that were employed. They were employed, some for very few hours, some for 30, 35, 40 hours. But during the quarter, there was 44.9% of the folks working, which was outstanding. It was really quite high for compared to some numbers that had been running in this model, had been consistently running in the 36, 37, 39%, touched into the 40%. But during that quarter, it was 44.9%. So quite an achievement. And now let's see if we can field a couple more questions, as I presume we might be running on about 19 minutes left or something.
Sorry, I was muted.
That's okay.
How is this type of CIE affecting the income of people in or not in Social Security work programs? Or are there average hours to work in that type of CIE you have seen to continue the income at the current rate, or lead to not having SSI, SSDI income?
Great question. Really, really thoughtful and on the mark. I mean, So the simple answer is income affects decisions to be made, and it's individualized. It's why you've heard me mention benefit planning at least a couple of times already. And it's on my last slide too, as we are going to do a training on that. And maybe my best answer from a fellow that used to do a lot of benefit planning training, or and just to be very honest, thought he knew it. Over the last few years now, as I've been using it less and less, I realize how much I didn't know. So let me show you a website and also make you aware of a training. It's not to avoid the question, it's to say there's a lot of opportunities out there. And an example. Did they, let me open that again if I can. I lost it. Oh, I know why I did. I guess Heather, did it say SSI?
It said SSI or SSDI income.
Yeah. So I hesitate, but I'm going to do it. SSI from Social Security Administration, that's supplemental security income. It's needs-based, right? So for anybody that's listening right now, again, I said SSI. I didn't put a D in there like dog or disability, right? So I'm talking about SSI. I don't know how many listening realize that this year, if a person is on SSI, you know, they have the opportunity, their check might go away, but they could remain Medicaid eligible in a category called 1619B this year, and they could make up to a little over $40,000. Now, if that surprises you, I would get it, because there's some outstanding opportunities. And then beyond that, with the right plan, that person might choose, I'm not saying they should or it would, but they might choose to work even more, get more hours, get more money per hour. They could move into freedom to work Medicaid buy-in in Michigan, very likely. There's absolutely no guarantees in all of this. Every one of them is individual, right? They need to have somebody help them think it through and make their informed decisions. But if they got in freedom to work Medicaid buy-in, they could work and make far more. On SSDI, where the D, as in disability, is in it, the rules are different. But there's lots of opportunity, and a person can move out of SSDI and move into freedom to work Medicaid buy-in as well. They could choose to work, make some money, and still keep their check, and they could make a plan to ease their way off from the check if they chose, and still have health coverage. So that's a very general way of saying it, but let me show you a couple of sites, and then that training that is being available a couple times a month that you might want to see if you can join now and then. And I'll keep giving updates to Marie and Heather that they can send out to the field as we add new dates. I hope that helped a little bit. Not trying to avoid the specific of it, but these are that's a very specific question for each individual. How about I go to those slides and I'll talk, and we'll see if we've got a couple of minutes left at the end, okay?
Okay.
All of a sudden, my screen won't move. Hold on. I'm going to try a new share, Heather. Or I'm going to stop share and try again. How about that? My apologies, folks. I don't know what happened there. The PowerPoint won't advance. I'm getting there, Heather. I'm getting there.
No problem.
Let's see if I pressed through it. Do you now see employment-related updates or sites?
Yes.
Thank you. I wanted to share these with all of you. And the last one after this, if it won't advance, folks, is just another opportunity to have some Q&A if it is applicable. So the first two I'm going to go through quickly. The third and fourth one I'll reserve a couple of minutes for. For those of you that are interested, excuse me, BHDDA, Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities Administration, now has a site that any of you can go to. This is a public site. It's called State Data/Michigan. It's technically statedata.info/Michigan. But I'm going to go there. I believe this will happen, Heather. I hope it will. Heather, can you now see Michigan employment outcome data? Gray screen.
Nope, we are still on the employment related updates.
Okay. Technology is great. Now can you see it?
Yes.
Well, hopefully it'll scroll with me. If not, I will talk you through it. Again, this is a public accessible site. If you use that link that's in here. Is the screen moving for you, Heather?
Yes, it is.
Thanks. On this, you could choose to look at stuff within the community mental health services programs, the 46 CMHSPs across the state. It's also got an option for the prepaid inpatient health plans, those 10 programs. But you can sort it by individuals with intellectual disabilities or folks with mental health, folks with mental illness and substance abuse. You do need to select one of those. So if I were to select intellectual disability, you come to a screen that then allows you to generate charts and tables. You need to select at least one CMHSP. So you check the box there on the left side. I looked at CMH for Central Michigan, those 6 counties up in the central part of the state earlier today. And I have a little current familiarity with looking at that one, so I'm going to bring it up. I tend to anymore pick an age range like 18. So anybody that's at least 18 and let's say up to 65, right? And you also need to scroll back to the top on the right-hand side. We keep trying to make it a little more user-friendly, but this is what you need to do. And you check at least one of these or all of them, and I'll check all of them. So we're going to look at full-time, competitive, integrated employment, part-time, unemployed, not in the competitive labor force. And then the last one is about someone's under 16. Well, we're not going to look at those numbers by age. So we generate charts and tables. And what you end up with is a chart here that tells us in Central Michigan in those 6 counties at the time of this report. If I scroll back to the top, this one ended in December of 21. It's updated every quarter and with their 12 months snapshots of what was reported then. This is information as reported by the CMH under the BHDDA, or the providers give the information to the CMH and the CMH reports it by the service code, the employment service code, or the description that it's got in the background of this reporting. But again, 1,772 people served up there. And if you highlight the cream color, Part-time competitive integrated employment, 8.55% of the individuals were employed in part-time competitive integrated employment. Statewide, that average is 8.66%. So they're pretty close to the state average. The purple is not in competitive integrated labor force, a whopping 74.61%. That's the purple is different than the blue. The blue is unemployed. The blue is people that are interested in employment, whereas the purple is folks just aren't looking, folks with intellectual developmental disabilities as told to staff, so as reported. Anyhow, and then if you go down further, scroll down further, you would find the numbers related. If it's under a certain number of people for so that we protect folks, the number isn't shown, but the percent, and then how many hours over a 2-week period, what was that average? So you could look from one site to another to the state average, and what was the mean earnings per hour, $9.65 an hour. And let's scroll down, the state was statewide. Yeah, the statewide average was $12.99. So you can do some comparison in looking at it. I'll scroll back to the top one more brief moment to show you 2 things you could do. You can search other activities. Other activities would be non-employment, but it's tracked in here, and you could look at these, maybe look at them from one December to another. What if you were trying to focus on facility-based activity program and your goal was to move out of facility? You could track and see, is that happening? Or one of these other areas. What about enclaves and mobile crews? Those certainly aren't individual. Is your goal to reduce that? Can you see how that is or isn't happening? And you have one other opportunity. You can look at activity trends by frankly playing with this and getting more comfortable with it. And you could pick, from the earliest report we had and maybe about a year later, and then here in the most recent one, and you could put something in there to look at and make your selections. So we just want you to know that the information's out there, could be looked at, and we are consistently trying to improve that work. Screen sharing has stopped as the shared window is closed. Okay. Let me pull up. You'll suddenly feel like I'm talking too slowly. On the second one, let me see. I'm getting my lesson on how to do this, Heather. Can you again see the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I'm not going to go to the state data one, folks. You can do it on the landing page. You look down, and to be honest, you'll see Alabama alphabetically. If you click on there, next to that, you can select Michigan. It's an interesting site because you can look at BHDDA data by numbers of lives, by percentage of people, but you can also look at our VR partners, MRS and BSBP. Their data is in there, how many people they work with. The very first page is about the statewide perspective of everybody working, but as you scroll down, you'd see a heading about our administration, and then also about MRS and BSBP. I would encourage you to take a look at it. It's interesting data, and you can again look at other states, or you can select to compare some states. I am going to take half a second relevant to that question about the question about, did the screen change, or can you see Disability Benefits 101?
It did not. I think you'll have to unshare and then share on your new screen.
You got it. say you do. Here we go. I'm hoping some folks, if not many, already know about DD 101. This is a Michigan, as you see in the, I presume you can now see it, right, Heather?
Yes.
Yeah, I presume, I'm sorry. It's specific. This is MI for Michigan, Michigan Disability Benefits 101.org. We're one of about a dozen states that have this estimator tool, and has many more resources than that. You can go to this public site. You can provide feedback if you have a question. You can use the feedback page. A little will show up, and you can put something in there. It'll either be addressed by the team that works on this, the national team that does it, or I or one of us at the state would get a question, we resolve it and work on it, or get back to an individual if they choose. But if you scrolled through this, you can, with some time, you can find, like I say, columns and information about articles specific to different disabilities or like that. We even added veterans focus here in the last year. I'm going to scroll down a little bit. There's 3 estimators here. The first one's the one that I most commonly use. You could put in a scenario of, this is what I'm doing now, I'm not working, what happens if? And by the time you get to the end of that scenario, it will show you an example of if you picked 12 hours a week at, pick a number out of your mind, $11.25 an hour. Or if you picked, wanted to work, what happened if I worked 27 hours and I worked $13 an hour? It'll show you not only the opportunity, but the impact, the health coverage that would continue. And it's based and has to be based on your specific situation. So it's very important to know what benefit you're receiving and see it. But perhaps the one that I send a lot of people to is about halfway down. You'll see some videos. If you click on this one, it gives you a brief 5-6 minute overview of how to use the site. And if you scroll down a little further, I apologize, my own screen is getting in my way. But if you scroll here, you'll see there's reporting wages for Michigan DHHS. What is SSI, Supplemental Security Income, in Michigan in 2022? And for the person to ask the question, well, what if I work? If you, oops, I hit the button by mistakes, folks, but it would open up and begin to explain what it is. And if you took a job in a very simple and straightforward way to help people understand, or maybe a family member, or open a discussion and then seek more help about it. So you can, that was this one here. There's one for youth because there's specific opportunities for youth that aren't there for people over the age of 22. I believe it's age of 22, and they're reporting wages. And for the party that asked about SSDI, I think it was the same person. What is SSDI? Pretty basic, but what about planning for work? And what about the work incentives? And then reporting wages. So these are great little articles, 3.5 to 5 minutes and 15 seconds probably on any of them. Pretty helpful stuff. And I would encourage any of you to go visit it. The last one I want to show you in these closing minutes, or I just wanted to share with you, that's what I wanted to do, is to go back to this PowerPoint slide. That's what you can see now, Heather?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Folks, I'm sorry that this bounces so much. I've seen it happen by other presenters, and now I can understand even better. But this last bullet, at Behavioral Health, we've had the opportunity to create a dispelling benefit to work myths along with a benefit to work coach model. But in this dispelling benefit to work myths, there is no charge to attend those training events. They do run about 3 hours. They've got a little bit of interactiveness, even in this virtual model. There's videos included. There's fill in the blank slides so that you do a little pre-test and a little post-test about what you did and didn't know. Quite informative. Its purpose is not to train people to understand benefit planning. That's not the purpose of the Dispelling Myths. The purpose is to engage with the person, to be proactive and positive about employment. In a very general way, I would suggest most people can work for sure and keep their health benefits. Not 100% true all the time, right? Things always have an exception, but there are so many opportunities for individuals that are being missed out on. So if you'd like, I will send that to Marie here right afterwards. Again, the current training opportunities. I think there's still 1 or 2 this month, another 1 or 2 in April, and others will be added through the summer. Set in, be part of the conversation, and just know that work is possible. You'll hear the current trigger numbers talked about, but the bigger picture is, oh, work is possible. I ought to look more into that and have maybe a benefit session with somebody. And there's some resources available around the state that are there now and growing. So we hope to see more and more people using those kind of services. So that's what I had, Heather, and thank you to this audience with a couple.
So we do have one more question in the Q&A that didn't get answered. It said,
Sure.
are there employment supports in Michigan serving people with IDD diagnosis that are working through some of the IPS principles? If so, are you aware what some of the key things are that they found to aid in success as well as barriers?
There are some programs. I think the question, as I heard it, was, are there some IDD programs that are using the IPS principles, or if I could use a word, kind of mirroring the model without being in the model? If that's the question, there's a couple of sites that have tried it and used the principles. I'd be glad to, as I think about it, Bay Area with some past leadership approached it that way, in the values of the IPS model. MRC Industries down in Kalamazoo comes to mind. And there is at least one other that I'm failing right now, where they're making attempts at doing it, but it's not the fidelity, it's not evidence-based practice if it isn't with folks with serious mental illness. Some of the challenges I think I've seen is, when I've heard about it talked nationally, what I hear is when it's been applied to and helped folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities, is I start hearing the word IPS light or IPS modified or this or that. Well, it's no longer IPS. Now, I'm not saying that it can't be helpful to use those values and approach it, but I would probably suggest that folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities more often may need some level of job coaching, and that may be a higher level of job coaching, at least initially, as fading would start or happen, than compared to folks with serious mental illness. So that's an equation that has to be solved. IPS has a ratio of working ideally with no more than 20 people at one time. And the same person is to do the different employment services. So you'd be finding the jobs, placing people, and also job coaching. Well, if that job coaching became immense, you don't have many hours left in a week sometimes. So there's some challenges in it, but it's being considered in some other states. Illinois has got several programs that are doing it. And again, their terminology was modified. I hope that helps a little. I see we're at 4:01. Heather, should we
Yes.
wait here or?
Yep, and I don't see any other questions in the chat box right now, but I just want to remind everyone that we will be emailing out a PDF with the presentation today, along with some of the links that Joe has talked about. And it will also have a link to the recording of today's webinar.
Thank you, everyone, for putting up with me for this past hour, and I appreciate it. Have a great week. Goodbye.
Thank you, Joe. As a reminder to folks, Joe will be returning in May to do part 2 of employment.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.